Okay.
She was flapping around, and I knew she probably laid eggs on there, but, it's disappeared. I'm sure it was a victim of a predator or something.
Right,
Man, I didn't realize how invasive those plants are.
yeah.
I thought I've got a tremendous crop this year, and I know my stock can take roots and buffers in this pots. I have about 6 feet tall, and they're big.
Right now,
Fragrant. I hadn't otherwise I thought at least it would have to be big at this time.
you gotta sit around and watch.
I kept thinking, words of like between these planets, but
How many years have you been in Mine did nothing. The first year I planted the seeds, they did nothing. Then, and I planted kind of like a rose bush, that heirloom rose bush, you know. This year they're coming up, rose bush are coming up in the plants.
They will come like this.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to First Universalist of New Madison. Definitely summer, but this is like summer's supposed to be. Kind of brisk and clean in the spring and the morning, and then it can get hot in the afternoon and then cool off at night so you can open your windows and sleep. So let's hope we'll keep going with that, although I know we're not going to. So, okay, do we have any announcements?
I would just remind everyone that we have our annual congregation, and it's going to be on the 24th of July.
Okay.
And then prior Tuesday, the 19th, we will have a board meeting. We'll try to do that by phone conference and see if everybody can drive it in. I'll get an agenda out. If you have any agenda items, let me know. Obviously, anyone interested in coming to the home conference, just call me. I put it on this week to give you updates.
Okay.
Anyone interested in attending the all basic congregation meeting, of course, come to the worship service on the 24th because it'll be following the worship service.
Right, the 19th will be a board meeting. It'll be a phone-in board meeting. Anybody and everybody is invited to that. Call Mike or call the church, and we'll give you the phone number. It's a conference call type thing. You don't have to say anything, but you can because we can hear you. So put your TV down low in the background, but you're more than welcome to listen to the debate that goes on. And then the 24th, we will have the annual congregational meeting. That will be here after church. It'd be fun if you come to church, but you can come after church for the meeting. You don't have to come to church. And everyone is invited to that as well.
But we do lock the doors following the service, so the 24th, you don't. So therefore, no one can escape the meeting.
Actually, my mind went to a darker place, so no one with a gun can get in, which every week, 303 or 304 mass shootings in the United States, and we're only in July. Compare that to Japan that had one shooting death last year and has had one this year. Prime Minister Abe, who was out of office, but still a very popular person. And the gun controls are so strict, the guy had to make his own gun and only had 2 shots. The contradictions are just amazing. Any other announcements? Okay, our prelude is "My Shepherd Will Supply My Need." want to thank Roberta for My Shepherd and for bringing in a beautiful rose. Sometimes it's hard to keep a positive attitude when things keep going the way they're going. So I guess my way of doing it is, I would call it a sense of humor. Some people say there's a little bit of a caustic edge to it. But you can tell that our subject this week, and we welcome Pastor Derek here to give us our message, is on Imperfect Saints. Imperfect Saints, feet of clay. Everybody knows Mount Rushmore, but how many of you have seen the other side of Mount Rushmore? So there you have, if you go around the other side of Dakota, that's what the back of Mount Rushmore would look like. And in the same vein, how many of you heard the news on Justice Kavanaugh this week? Went to Morton's Steakhouse to have a nice dinner, nice private dinner, and celebrate the passages of the successes of the Supreme Court. People found out about it. There's actually a group that is paying a bounty of $50 to anybody who works in a restaurant who will notify them of a Supreme Court justice frequenting that restaurant. Then the protesters show up out in front, polite, out in front. They didn't go in the restaurant. I don't think Justice Kavanaugh even saw they were there. But Morton's Restaurant put in a scathing criticism about how everyone, including Supreme Court justices, have the right of privacy, the right to enjoy dinner in their own place or in a public place without being harassed. It turns out Justice Kavanaugh left through the back door so he wouldn't have to confront the protesters. So at least we know that Justice Kavanaugh now knows what a back alley looks like and the places he has sentenced many women to in the future. And people have replied to Morton's Restaurant, and after searching the Constitution, it turns out there is nothing mentioned in the Constitution about private dinners. So Morton's cannot tell us that Justice Kavanaugh can have a private dinner, as it is not listed in the Constitution, and that's what we go by. What they tell us is listed as what we do. Curiously, when the protesters, anti-abortion protesters, protested at abortion centers or family life centers or Planned Parenthood, the Supreme Court said they had every right to invade the Planned Parenthood centers and protest and interrupt that private business. So once again, we're dealing with hypocrisy. All right, so here we have Justice Kavanaugh, the Constitution, and the beautiful steaks of Morton's Steakhouse. After that bit of caustic levity, let us center ourselves for true worship with a moment of silence. Reading 508 in your hymnal. Save us from weak resignation to violence. Teach us that restraint is the highest expression of power, and that thoughtfulness and tenderness are the mark of the strong. Help us to love our enemies, not by countenancing their sins, but remembering our own. A standard Christian prayer. Opening hymn is 35.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's one you're familiar with, and you're more than welcome to read along with me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human beings, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. That's by Griswold Williams. All right, our children's story, following along on Imperfect Saints, is more or less Feet of Clay. Does anybody know what biblical story this is? One of the most prominent subjects in the Bible. Written, I think there's more verses, more chapters about David than any other. In speaking of Feet of Clay, David came to prominence when he slew Goliath with his slingshot. He was like a 18 or 19-year-old, maybe not even that old, because he was not supposed to be in the army. But he stood up and said, we will fight the heathens, what's the word for uncircumcised that they used?
I don't know, but I think the group, Goliath may have been the Philistine.
I think, well, whatever group, they referred to them. I was reading some of these little excerpts, and it kept referring to them as the uncircumcised, or whatever the Jewish term for that is, which was an interesting parallel and an interesting notable fact. But anyway, David slew Goliath and then became king of Israel. And was a fairly just and famous leader. And his downfall, well, I wouldn't say it was his downfall, one of his problems arose when he saw from the top of his castle, or the place where he lived, which was on the highest area in Jerusalem, he looked down on the remaining town, and he saw Bathsheba. I'm sure you've heard the story of David and Bathsheba bathing, which I'm not sure she had a swimming pool, and I'm not sure exactly that people went up on the roof to bathe. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that. It looks like a little to me of male patriarchy blaming Bathsheba for the temptation of David. But be that as it may, her husband Uriah was a favorite soldier and a famous soldier, and I think he was a Hittite. He was off to war, fighting the wars for David, and he invited Bathsheba to come over and have a little tete-a-tete, and it turned out they got intimate, and Bathsheba became pregnant. David's had, at that time, he had toes of clay, but they were growing on his feet and they were getting farther up toward his ankle. When she told him that she was pregnant, he decided to cover his tracks by bringing Uriah back and telling him, you've been working hard, fighting hard, take a day off, go home, be with your wife. I'm sure she's lonely for you. The idea being, then, if she became pregnant, it would be Uriah's child and not David's. Uriah, being a loyal and faithful soldier, said, no, I will stay at the gates of your temple and I will protect you. So he refused to go home. David, again, the next night, said, it's very important that you go home and spend time with your family. And Uriah, being a loyal soldier, refused again. David's next choice was to send Uriah back to the battlefield with a note for the commanding general saying, put Uriah in the most dangerous place of the fighting and withdraw the support behind him. Uriah was then killed in battle. David then married Bathsheba, and the baby was born. David now has feet of clay. But I've noticed in the Jewish Bible and actually the Christian Bible and in many of our folk tales, David is praised for repenting, for admitting his guilt, and regaining the full support of the Lord. A prophet came to David and said, there is an example of a man who stole his neighbor's pet lamb to serve it for dinner for a famous guest. And David was outraged and said, "Who is that man? We will punish him for taking someone else's sacrifice and using it as his own." The prophet said, "That man is you, David." He knew what David had done. David repented, confessed his sins, and was forgiven by the Lord. And this is what has always struck me about religion. If you remember the story of Job, who was tempted by the devil, the Lord allowed the devil to take Job's wife, his children, his livestock, his property. Job remained faithful and was rewarded by God with more wives, more children, and more livestock. There seems to be some collateral damage here that nobody seems to pay any attention to. What about the son of Bathsheba and David? What about Uriah? Asking forgiveness, I agree, is definite, and repentance is definitely worth it. But is that truly what it is? Is that truly repentance? Is that the elevation of the victims of crime to the place where they should be held? Hardly a children's story, but definitely something that relates to feet of clay. All right, joys and concerns. Or do we have any comments on David? Okay, yes.
Two to share. This morning I got word from Tiana White, a longtime member of the El Dorado Church, Dot Fark, had passed away early this morning. Dot has been chronically and seriously ill for quite some time. But, we don't know anything yet about the family's plans for a memorial service, but Dot passed away very early this morning. The second one is a kind of personal request. I'll be asked for traveling mercies. Thursday I'll be driving up to Michigan to see my own mother, who I've not seen since New Year's Day. I'll be up there for a few days. So traveling mercies. Oh, and a third one, since I'm talking. I did get a phone call this past week from one of my best friends in high school. He is in the middle of cancer treatment, and he's at a point in the treatment where he's dealing with a fair amount of pain. So I just ask you to hold him in your heart, because that's a hard place to be as you're going over that mountain. Part of the issue is that the position they have to put him in for the radiation treatments is a very stressful position to maintain as they're irradiating him, and it leaves him with pretty bad back pain despite physical therapy. So.
Okay. We want to remember the people of Ukraine. This is going to be a long, protracted war of attrition. The Russians think they can outlast everyone else, and we don't really know the answer to that. Ukrainians are fighting valiantly, and they're getting support from the free nations of the world, NATO and the United States. But it is truly a war of attrition, and Russia is 10 times the size of Ukraine. So we don't want to forget that. I want to bring up, you may have heard the news, Yosemite is under threat again. There's a wildfire that's broken out in Yosemite. They've evacuated the populace. This is one of our major heritage spots in America, a place of sublime beauty. They're wrapping the trees in aluminum foil or some kind of reflective foil. These wildfires are evidently so ferocious that everything, all the command of technology that man has is still not able to stop them. That is a frightening thing we have arrived at.
Yeah, the trees are adapted to handle moderate levels of fire, and even that, interesting enough, will prompt their seeds to open after a fire, but the nature of the fires are much more severe. What they're putting on them are those same like silvery blankets that firefighters use. I can't remember the name of the substance, but yeah, they're having to wrap the trunks of the trees.
Right. The problem they're getting into, and not just in the sequoias, but all the trees, these fires are so intense that they become crown fires. They don't spread along the ground. The top of the tree catches fire and then spreads to the top of another tree that spreads to the top of another tree.
So it
Sequoias,
airborne.
yeah, the sequoias have incredibly thick bark and can withstand. If you look at the area around the sequoia, there's just dirt around the base. So and I'm not sure what the aluminum blankets do for that. But anyway, what's killing the trees is when the crown burns off, then the tree is killed. It's dead. It has no leaves, no needles to gather nourishment and to interact with the environment. And that's happening to pine trees, to all the trees that are involved in this, because these fires are so hot and so intense, and the environment is so dry. Speaking of dry, all of the lakes, all the reservoirs out west, we talked about the Great Salt Lake, that's even drier than it was the last time that I talked to you about it. They had aerial photos of that, Lake Powell. There's going to be some major changes that have to take place in places like Nevada that depend on water. And what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of our food, if you've noticed, lettuce went from 99 cents a head to $1.70 or $1.80 a head. This is all grown around Sacramento and the Central Valley of California, which is all water. All that water comes from the Colorado River, and there's not any water left. So something's going to happen with food too, and people are just pretty much putting their heads in the sand, so to speak. Anything else? Yes.
I want you to notice the beautiful rose, which I brought in memory of my mother-in-law, John Johannes, who was died, and also in memory of Kenny's wife, Janet Baker.
Janet.
It came from a house where my parents lived, and the house now is empty, and mother and the roses, and that was one of those.
So that house is next to yours,
It's 2 doors down.
2 doors down, and those people have left.
Yes.
So Roberta's taking care of the roses for them. And I would like to say we remember this rose for the people who care, not just the people who are gone, because depending on what your beliefs are, they can't hear us, they don't know what we're saying. But Roberta and Kenny, the people of the Ukraine, the people who have lost somebody, Derek, who knows people who are suffering, they are the people who we need to support. We will never see most of the people they're talking about, but we see these 3 and everyone else every day. So they need our community, they need our support. They need somebody's got to come up with another thing, thoughts and prayers. Somebody come up with something that I can use instead of that. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth every time I say that. Anything else? Okay. I was going to bring a picture. I don't think I did. Oh, I know. I've got another for good news. Remember we talked about lightning bugs? I don't know if you can see this very well. Somebody has done a study of lightning bug trails and how their flashes go off. Some do irregular pauses and then a long flash. Some do quick flashes and then a pause and then quick flashes. Some just do irregular length, and some do like dot, 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 dot. So it's just, and if you look at, there was one thing that had like 30 different trails, and I think I had a picture of that when we did the thing on lightning bugs. But nature and the environment and the natural world is an amazing place if you watch Channel 16 or any of the nature shows. We want to help nature help us. If we don't help them, we are destined for the end as well.
And
All right.
if you could decipher that, there's probably a message in that.
Probably is a message in that. God is talking to us. I'm sure someone is saying that. And I'm sure someone is in church right now saying, give me money, I'll tell you what the lightning bug is.
It also, Mike, it depends on where the lightning bugs buy their LEDs.
Yes. Okay. It's time for Pastor Derek, who we welcome, and we got to hear him twice. Oh, I forgot to mention, we missed last Sunday, it's the first Sunday of the month, so we will do fish this Sunday. So don't forget that when it's time for the offering. We are doing Imperfect Saints.
It's good to be back in your pulpit here in New Madison. It's been a little while. Last time I was here was in May. I was away in June for vacation. I want to say thank you to the El Dorado congregation for releasing me to come up here this morning. I'm always glad when I can. Yeah. A reading, a Sufi Muslim prayer from 19th century Baghdad. O God of mercy, before whose door mercy has bowed down, all are poor and needy, and you in truth are the generous, the bringer of peace, the all-powerful. So if you ever have the chance to travel to Chicago, and especially the west side of Chicago, you will find a landmark building that is the Third Unitarian Church of Chicago. It's still in operation, has a nice little congregation there. It's kind of a solemn-looking, modern church building, a product of being made of a lot of brick and plain glass during the year 1936, so in the midst of the Great Depression. But most noteworthy about the building are 25 painted tile murals by an artist named Andreen Kaufman, depicting what were termed 25 liberal saints. And as you might anticipate, the collection of 25 is a bit eclectic. There are figures from world religions, Jesus, the Buddha, Confucius. There are Unitarian preachers like Ralph Waldo Emerson, James Martineau, and William Ellery Channing. There are social reformers like Jane Addams. There are great authors like Goethe and Walt Whitman. There are weighty American presidents like Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Woodrow Wilson. The very last mural installed was for Martin Luther King Jr., created in the year after he was murdered in Memphis. Now, obviously, not all of these saints were Unitarians or Universalists, but each embodied some kind of value that the artist wanted to lift up about our faith. Now, some of the murals have not aged as well as others. For example, one is dedicated to Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld, a man I have never heard of. He is a man who evidently made quite a splash in his own day, but who's grown very obscure with the passage of time. And as far as I can figure out, John Peter Altgeld, his chief claim to fame was that he pardoned 3 men wrongly convicted of participation in the Haymarket Massacre in Chicago. Other murals have not aged as well for completely different reasons. Namely, that the ethical failings of the people they represent are now much better known and more widely acknowledged. For example, one mural depicts President Woodrow Wilson. On the one hand, following World War I, Woodrow Wilson was a tireless advocate for international peacemaking. On the other hand, he was also a consistent advocate for racial segregation in education, housing, and the armed forces. And because of his segregationist history, in 2020, Princeton University removed Woodrow Wilson's name from that university's School of International Affairs. And then there's Thomas Jefferson, one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, and despite a lifelong Anglican in Virginia, he was a public advocate for Unitarian theology, strangely enough. He was also the editor of what is in some circles referred to as the infamous Jefferson Bible, which condensed all 4 canonical Gospels into what is academically known as a gospel harmony. But this harmony that Jefferson put together placed emphasis on the teachings of Jesus and largely expunged the miracles. So despite being an Anglican, he was doing Unitarian stuff down in Virginia. So on the one hand, an advocate for human freedom and dignity and religious reform, but on the other hand, hypocritically, a slave owner who we know sexually exploited at least one of his female slaves. And Jefferson did not free his own children born of slavery until it took place posthumously through his will after he died. Now, because of this exploitive relationship, Unitarian churches that have been named after Thomas Jefferson have, all in recent years, except in one case of one church in Texas, they've all dropped Thomas Jefferson from their church names. I have one more problematic example, and this is the one that is really difficult for most people to look squarely in the eyes. I have a really hard time looking at it and being honest. And it is Martin Luther King Jr. In my mind, the greatest prophet of the 20th century, the inspired soul of the civil rights movement, and the man who challenged America to live up to our own words, that all people are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights. So on the one hand, one of the greatest voices of equality in the 20th century. But on the other hand, there's clear evidence that Martin betrayed his marriage by having a series of adulterous relationships with other women, and there are multiple accounts of him engaging in sexist disregard for the viewpoints of women who were in leadership positions during the civil rights movement, and findings from Boston University that portions of his doctoral thesis were plagiarized. And I know that I'm guilty of being in quasi-denial about these betrayals, sexist conduct, and dishonesty, because I don't want these ethical failings to detract from the good that he actually did, or for his failings to be exploited by others who would like to delegitimate his life, his work, his ministry. So now we get to the question, what do we do when we discover that our saints and prophets, people who embody key values that we uphold, what do we do when we discover that a number of these people have significant moral failings? Well, there's what we often do, and then there's what I think we ought to do to better handle these unwelcome discoveries. Very often, people respond with two polarized opposite reactions. At one pole, the reaction that responds with embarrassment or anger and tries to erase the memory of the imperfect saint. It's a kind of rejection that says, you know, you aren't as good as I thought you were, and I want nothing to do with you again. In present-day language, it plays out popularly in what in some circles gets termed cancel culture. It's a term that I despise because of the way it gets used politically to demonize anybody who tries to hold accountable powerful media figures and politicians. But there is a little grain of something real there behind the term at work in our culture. A standard of purity that tries to erase flawed people from our social fabric. Now, the other reaction, the other pole, responds with defensiveness and denial, saying, well, you don't know for sure that's what really happened, or refusing to talk about the ethical failure at all. Nope, not going to talk about it. Or viewing anyone who brings up those failings as somehow disloyal. It's a kind of reaction that fears that the good the flawed figure accomplished will be viewed as illegitimate and possibly dismantled. And there is something there, a little kernel of something there behind that fear. Because in a culture where people play gotcha and grasp at the failings of others in order to grab for their own advantage and power in government and business, there is a kind of corruption that creeps into our psyche, and it wants power, even if it corrodes the good that people have labored for in our social fabric. These are the two things people often do. And then there's what I think we probably should do more often when we make the unwelcome discoveries that our saints are flawed. In our reading for today, the Sufi prayer speaks of the door to mercy before whom mercy bows down. Mercy is both taken and given in the same reciprocal action before our highest ideals, who the Sufi understands to be God. From a different angle, St. John, in his first biblical letter, 1 John 1, verse 8, writes that if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and there is no truth in us. We embody dishonesty when we think that anybody, including ourselves, are without failing. So, what we ought to do, what we need to do, what we need to do if we are going to survive as a human civilization is to engage in rigorous acts of honesty and strategic mercy simultaneously. We need to be honest about both the good and the bad that all people do, and exercise the transformative power of accountability where we can, learn from those failings, and practice mercy in ways that can be constructive. It's the only way to sift through the good and the bad, to divide the two from one another, consciously reform the failings at work in our culture so we are less likely to repeat them, and consciously carry the good forward. It is a process of being reformed and ever reforming. Our imperfect saints and our memories about them are not the only people that need this. Everyone does. There are things I have probably said and done that won't age well over time. They may have been unartfully performed or were grounded in my own ignorance that turned out to be hurtful. And sometimes, yes, rooted in my own bad motives, because I have those like anyone else. And the same is true for you and for every human being who has ever lived or ever will live, no matter whether we are labeled a saint or not. We need the kind of mutual, merciful honesty that allows us to sort through the good and the bad without leaving people behind or destroying the good that they actually did accomplish. So before we enter into our time of dialogue, which I would say is just as valuable and even sometimes more valuable than my ministry here, I want to echo lyrics from this morning's opening hymn. May the whole truth be spoken here. Thy gospel light forever shine, thy perfect love cast out all fear, and human life be made divine. May the whole truth be spoken here. What spoken ministry would you share this morning?
What does it say about our society that the juvenile, infantile minds that want to shut down knowledge and awareness are the dominant force? If you look at the laws being passed in Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi, even north into Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, there are suits already underway on the critical race theory where someone tries to say this is the wrongs that America committed and we should learn from them. They put their fingers in their ears and say, I do not want to, and I do not only do I not want to know about it, I don't want my kids to know about it.
Oh, and there are so many chunks of that to unpack in what you just said. So many pieces to unpack. If I could approach this, even from a very, very conservative angle, conservative Christian angle, because these are the people who call on other people to repent. Can't get forgiveness if you don't repent. Well, if that's true for people individually, why would it be false if it involved us as a nation? And really, can we really heal, move forward constructively, if we can't admit what has happened in our own nation? Probably not. It's a kind of denial. And the notion that it's somehow unpatriotic to bring up past failings. I remember long ago, not that long ago, but when I was the minister the first time at El Dorado, there was an older guy who's now deceased. His name was Dale Mills, who was a member there. He lived kind of just a little bit north of Richmond. I think they had a Fountain City address. And Dale said, it's not my country right or wrong. It's my country to stand by it when it's right. It's my country to put it right when it goes wrong. That's patriotism. That being reformed and ever reforming. I mean, so you're right. I mean, there are so many little chunks of this. There are other chunks that are about if we can control the knowledge, we can exercise power. Power over, I don't know, gay and lesbian people in public education. I think of an interview I heard with a preschool teacher, not a kindergarten teacher in Florida. His school encourages people to put up photographs of their families. Have them on your desk so the kids can see that, people have families, uphold the importance of families. This kindergarten teacher is a gay guy married to another man. If he puts that photo out, does it get considered age inappropriate in his kindergarten class? And he gets sued? It's about erasing the existence of his family.
It's already happening.
Oh, absolutely.
They're taking their pictures down.
Absolutely. I don't know that I would want to, I would really think twice about having a photo of my husband and I up and risking a lawsuit from the least, maybe I should say, the most intolerant parent of a child in my classroom. I would like to think that, at least for now, I might still win that lawsuit. But you're going to be dragged to court, you're going to have legal fees. It's a huge, huge, intimidating thing. So yeah, part of it, there is so much in what you said that expresses so many different kinds of dishonesty at work in our culture. And if we can stand for anything, we should stand for a kind of honesty. Dolly?
My daughter just got a job in Mobile, Alabama, and she's going to be teaching American history for the first time. She's a Latin teacher. And how does she teach American history and not lie if she wants to not go to jail or whatever that will do?
Or have
At least
her
lose her job.
Or have her lose her job for not following.
She hates it already, and she's just studying.
Oh, exactly. I mean, there are so many people this affects. How can she be honest? How can she be accurate about American history?
Well, she and her husband at different times were president of their congregations,
Mm-hmm.
and they're, very liberal. And this is just going to be hard for her.
Yeah. I totally.
This is changing the direction of the conversation a little bit, but as you were giving your sermon,
Mm-hmm.
I thought of our former minister, Richard Demas. And I think I met Richard around 1990, something like that. So I've known him and Marcia a long time. And I used to go to the Unitarian church that he was pastor in Dayton.
Oh, you were at Miami Valley.
Miami Valley, yeah. And growing up Catholic, as I did, the priests were like the next thing to Jesus himself, so keep in mind that context. Then I meet someone like Richard, who's the first non-Catholic experience I had with a religious person. And I was impressed with him right away, but something that he would do over the years is give lessons about his own faults as a person. I mean, infidelity in marriage, career paths that were not, didn't coincide with where he ended up to be. Not the best parent at times, just the kinds of faults that most people keep secret. And Richard put them out there, would give us a beautiful sermon about it, about his own shortcomings, even making the same mistakes more than once. But I always got out of it that even though it's way up here, they're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And human beings are capable of doing some horrible stuff. I've done some horrible stuff. And, don't scoff. I have, okay? But because Richard was the way he was in his sermons, bringing those faults out and helping us identify with them and then offering solutions or better paths to follow. That quality in him makes me idolize him even more. Rather than being like the priests I grew up with who, would never have any faults. And something that Marcia said in here one day, I can't remember the context of it, but it was during the feedback time. And she said that, I can't paraphrase it because I don't remember exactly, but to wake up every day and try to make my choices and my day the best Marcia I can be. And that, the best Marcia I can be is exactly what she said. So here's this couple who I think deserve to be up on a pedestal for the reasons that the media would say, cut them down, gotcha.
Well, there are people who would want to take advantage of that knowledge. That's why we're often scared to admit the bad things we've done for whatever reason. But I will say one of the reasons among all of the choices, the religious choices, I prefer to come to a faith community like this one. Because at our best, we are willing to be realistic about the fact that we are human. And that those choices, each and every person here is a miracle of potential. Potential to do good and wonderful things. Potential to do bad things. But if we are mindful about our doing, we can be encouraged and nurtured to choose the good more and more often. Does it make us perfect? No. But it means we're willing to be the work in progress in all the best ways that can mean. And I was thinking about those Catholic priests. Part of the irony is presenting themselves publicly as flawless. If they were true to their own faith, in private, they should still have been engaging in confession. But I still wonder sometimes, given some of the scandals that have taken place in the Catholic Church, although it's not unique to them, how often that was faithfully performed. Because confession is supposed to come with penance and change.
I think there's something to be said for somebody like Richard who has accepted accountability for his mistakes, rather than, trying to just hide it or something.
And I would say it is a sign of not just bravery, but of spiritual depth.
Yeah.
When you are willing to stand in the accountability moment and go, it doesn't mean you're a doormat for just, any criticism that someone wants to fling at you. But it does mean if you can stand there and go, you know what? You're right about X. And from this point forward, I need to Y, whatever that is. So, Well, I hope this has been good food for thought this morning, both for the congregation here and the folks who are together elsewhere in the world. I will be back to be in ministry with you, I believe, August 14, and I'll be looking forward to it.
Derek is always welcome. He has a real folksy, reachable way of talking about things that are complicated and bringing down to something we can understand.
I want everyone to understand.
Yes.
There's a horrible joke. It'll make sense to a few. There's this horrible joke that took place at the merger between the Universalists and the Unitarians. And the Unitarian joke that the Universalist is simply a Baptist who figured out how to read. And the Universalist said, and a Unitarian does not enjoy a sermon unless they could not understand it themselves. Yeah, both of those are kind of mean.
Yes. But we need to remember the focus of the sermon and the focus of the day, feet of clay. Repentance. We talked about David and whether David really changed or David just said he repented. You can only tell the proof is in the pudding or whatever cliche you want to use on the way people act. There was a thing on the radio this week about Abraham Lincoln, who was truly a noble person. He used to go to the telegraph office every day and read the names of the wounded and those who had died for the Union, and then write letters to some of the parents. And the reporter who was there, who Lincoln didn't know he was there, reported that he came out of the telegraph office crying and almost stumbled trying to get to the street. This was a person who cared deeply about other people. Anybody can make mistakes, and I don't know how you quantify caring deeply, but we all know those people, particularly the TV preachers who are caught red-handed or with their pants down or whatever you want to say. They apologize and repent, and they're right back there asking for money and doing the same thing. So there is a difference, and I regret that at least 40% of the population doesn't seem to be able to recognize that. Okay, we're going to get off this subject. Our offering, we are going to do fish again this week. And we're going to hear long ago and far away. Put something in if you can, take something out if you need to. Closing hymn is number 42, Morning So Fair to See. Something's not sticking here. Our pilgrim song, buoyant and brave and strong, that sounds like a dirge to me. Way too slow. All right, our extinguishing our chalice is 474. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies all that unifies and brings peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all sects, classes, nations, and races one global community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hearts and hearts. Poems, Chandra Sen, and arranged, was that was on the music at one time?
I think it was probably poetically arranged, like John Haynes' poems.
Okay, interesting, very good. All right, as a concluding note, I want us to remember those who we talked about earlier today who lost someone, who has someone in their heart that is in pain, the three of you here. And then I want us to remember Highland Park, the 2-year-old who's asking for his parents, both of whom were killed, the 10-year-old or 8-year-old whose spine was severed. These 2 kids are still alive. They need the support of the world, of their community, of the family that they have left. All right. The postlude is White Cliffs of Dover. Tunes of World War II, the last thing the soldiers, sailors, and airmen saw when they were leaving England to go fight as they left the port of Dover, and the first thing that they saw as they returned from the fight, as they sailed in or flew in the White Cliffs of Dover, which, if you've ever seen them, is it's a pretty amazing sight in itself. All right, that ends our service. Does anybody know what this is?
Water swallow.
Barn swallow nest. And I told you about barn swallow nests. They only nest where there are livestock. This is in the barn where Curly has his stall. This is right above his head. So I was glad to see, and if you look over to the side, you'll see the nest from bygone years that have disintegrated and fallen apart because there were no livestock in that barn. So that ends our service. I still have donuts left from Eikenberries. They've been frozen, but they're decent now because they're thawed out. And there's ice cubes in the water if you want lemonade instead of coffee. Have a good week, and let us know if you need anything.
Did Dolly check out early?
Must have. I wasn't watching. Yeah, she must have. She's not here.